All right, thank you for staying with Daybreak. Let's talk about now that conversation on the debt blame game and the state of economy and lower food prices, which has been a conversation trending on social media. But the question is, should the next government now be considering austerity measures based on where we are? Is our debt level even sustainable? Then let's rope that in to the political promises that are being made right now. And Honorable Moro, I'll start with you on this one. And this is also related to what the Speaker of the National Assembly was saying here on the front page of the Standard. He says it's a cartel country, says Speaker, on the cost of food. Is that where our problem is? Is it the cartels or is it just a failed parliament? Because most people say all these bills and laws were passed by parliament and they were all bystanders as all these things were happening.
I think we are also here to give an objective analysis of what has really happened, rather than trading barbs because of the fact that we want to settle political scores. And it is true, for example, if you look at the price of various commodities, they have really changed. For example, if you look at, a packet of maize flour during Uhuru tour, it was 90 bob. Now it is 115 in the handshake. If you look at, for example, sugar, the same case, 1 kilogram. Or sugar, it has gone up. Milk, it was 45, now it's at 55. So that is true. But then the whole issue, even help, people are getting 60,000, now they are getting 37,000. All of these issues have come because of poor management of debt and the economy. When we were in the National Assembly, and Opio and I was with me that time in the 11th Parliament, is when we increased the debt ceiling from 3 to 4.5 trillion. I protested when that bill, lifting came. It's on record, it's on Hansard. I protested because I am a development economist. So I know, at that time I was a member of the Budget and Appropriations Committee. So I know what that means in terms of, the way we were over-borrowing. Because the ideal situation, so that for proper, stable macroeconomic, variables, you need at least 20 to 35% of debt to GDP ratio. Of course, it has always been varied to 50%. Right now, we are at 72%, which is actually, we are in the red. And that is on the record. We have been debating this with Henry Rotich. I had predicted, actually, Trevor Ombija. It's on record. But whoever is going to be president in 2022 will have no country to run. That is way back in 2014. But I was dismissed and told that I was waxing eloquence and I couldn't change anything. Now, Mutava Musiemi, my friend, who was then a budget committee chair, and I was a ranking member there, I called him the other day and asked him, you see what I used to tell you, it is happening. Yeah. And even in 2020, I think I made a statement that went viral. Now, we have done what we call development corruption on our economy. Trevor, we have overborrowed for infrastructural development at inflated costs very seriously with very little return on investment. You'll be surprised to know, for example, that the SGR has broken even to the Chinese. They're about 400 or so billion, 443 billion, has been repaid in terms of the goods that have, transited through the SGR. But we have remained with the debt, and they are using their state-owned enterprises to do the same work that Kenyans would do in the name of technology transfer. So right now, honestly, President Kibaki left the country very stable, but if you look at the borrowing that happened in the Uhuru first term, it was 2.7 trillion. The handshake term is 7.2 trillion. This includes the 8.2 that you mentioned, plus the guarantee. So right now we have a debt, a stock of about 11.7. trillion, against my own estimate of an economy of about 9.8 trillion. This business of being told that we have a 20 trillion economy is hogwash. There is no way the economy has grown by 2 trillion simply by rebasing the economy based on the 2019 census. Okay. So basically, we've made the wrong decisions. We predicated upon the raising of the debt ceiling, Trevor, on regulations, rather than it being a matter of legislation. So when the debt ceiling was being raised from 3 to 4.5 trillion, it was a contentious issue. Then from 4.5 to 6 trillion, then from 6 to 9. And for me, I had a very long conversation with Ukuri Atani because I was a vice chairman of the Finance and Budget Committee of Senate right at that time. And I was the acting chair at that point in time. And I told him as much because I knew they were going to exhaust this. Okay. This coupled with the COVID COVID, shocks, and also a very expanded government under devolution, where the first charge of the ordinary shareable revenue is to go to counties, who right now, as we speak, they've not gotten the budget of their second quarter, means that then we have serious financial management crisis. Cash flow is a big issue. Yeah. The economy is underperforming. If you look at the issue of revenue to GDP, we are doing barely 15%. The OECD countries are doing up to 40%. Yeah. And yet, right now, going forward, and this is what I want to say, going forward, we have just to forget these issues we call development. Okay. You remember I said about development corruption. We have to forget, because we have to regenerate the economy. You have to go back to productivity. Manufacturing is supposed to be 15% of our GDP. It is nowhere, anywhere. In fact, we are now even being, countries like Uganda, which were actually, we were selling more to them than we are getting from them, are actually selling more to us. Yeah. Basic commodities like food is being imported from Tanzania. Okay. So what went wrong? That's the question we need to ask ourselves. Okay. And I lay this squarely on the handshake because, Trevor, for 4 years, we were just talking about BBI. We actually reprioritized our country from dealing with the economy to dealing with the constitution so that we can have self-preservation. Okay. That is why, out of me questioning that whole process, last year, I had 7 court cases. I was in court over 30 times. Drones were sent to my house. DCI was, implored upon me to do investigations. They even had a travel ban from me going out of the country because of questioning the idea that then you have to change the constitution to self-perpetuate, rather than looking at the economy and putting money in people's pockets. All right.
Yeah. Have we simply over-borrowed, like what Maura is saying, and is this squarely to blame on the handshake?
Trevor, first and foremost, I must go on record that as the chair of the Public Accounts Committee in the National Assembly, the issue of borrowing or over-borrowing, as it were, is something we have pronounced ourselves on consistently in our reports, which have been adopted by the House from 14-15, 15-16, 16-17, and 17-18 financial years. And therefore, I should know something or two about this subject of borrowing. Yeah. But before I get there, we need to debunk this notion that this over-borrowing has happened after or post the handshake. And particularly, we need to dismiss the figures being bandied about by the Tangatanga grouping. The other day, I had Musalia Mudavadi talk of a debt portfolio of about 11 trillion shillings, if I'm not wrong.
Yes.
Now, those are...
11.7. Yeah? 11.7.
Yes. Those are figures which are far-fetched. And in fact, it puts to doubt the authority of Musalia Mudavadi as an economist. I understand he did some land economics. Maybe could do better in land valuation and things like that. If you want to get figures concerning the level of borrowing, you don't need to go any further than the Central Bank of Kenya. And even if you went to Parliament, where Maura is and I, if you look at the last medium-term debt strategy paper of 2021, you see, these figures are there. And therefore, it is wrong, it's immoral, it is dishonest for people who call themselves leaders to start throwing around figures which are speculative to the public.
So according to you, what is the figure?
The figure is about 8.2, 8.4, there about trillion shillings. Okay. And we have said in our reports as Public Accounts Committee that for the last 5 or so years, the debt portfolio has increased consistently by about 20%. And I'm not saying that debt is bad, or that even an increase in debt is bad, per se. The issue we should be asking ourselves is, did this borrowing start yesterday? No. Is it wrong to borrow? No. The issue is, to what use have we put our borrowed funds? That is the most important thing in my view. And this borrowing did not start yesterday. The problem we're currently facing in the country, the problem of people being unable to afford basic foodstuffs or basic life needs, it's not just a question of borrowing. That is simplistic. It's a very simplistic way of looking at things. It is a function of very many factors, including the wanton corruption that was the hallmark of the first Jubilee administration. And the status of that corruption are known. They are now in Tanga. The prefects, the head boys of corruption in Jubilee 1 government, they are there. They are leading Tanga. Okay? They should be telling us this. We know for sure. There's empirical evidence that mega corruption cases were rampant in the first Jubilee government. The NYS 1, the NYS 2, and so on and so forth. Okay? So the current state of living of Kenyans is a factor of so many causes.
Okay.
And therefore, to start laying blame on handshake is really to miss the point. There is no handshake government, as you know, as you all know for sure. There's no government called handshake.
Yeah.
Raila Odinga, who is my leader, party leader, even after shaking hands with President Uhuru Kenyatta, never joined the government. He doesn't sit in the cabinet. There can be no borrowing without cabinet passing a cabinet memo presented by the cabinet secretary for national treasury. Who sits in the cabinet? It's the president, his deputy, and cabinet secretaries. Why can't the deputy president raise these issues in the cabinet meetings, which approve these borrowings? Why? Why do you want to confuse Kenyans? Why do you think Kenyans are foolish? Okay? So Raila Odinga and ODM and Azimio have got nothing to do with the borrowings. Okay? The corruption in the first Jubilee administration is squarely to blame, if you ask me. And secondly, the economy hasn't performed well, again, partly because of the corruption.
Yeah.
Yes, because a lot of funds were being siphoned out. I'm aware, and I'm told, that in the Jubilee One administration, parastatals were given targets of how much to take every weekend to that place you know better. Okay? Every weekend, they are taking money in gunny bags. Parastatals, ministry, and that's the money we are seeing being used now for these campaigns. Money that has been used to radicalize the youth who are unemployed. Okay. See? It's a question of taking their money and taking it back to them as in form of handouts, in the form of wheelbarrows. That is not right. Okay. And we must call them out for what they are.
Dr. Gola, should the next government consider austerity measures based on where we are at? There's one team that says it's 8.2 trillion, others say it's 11.7 trillion. The issue here is on the guaranteed debt, whether it should be included or not. But should the next government consider austerity measures if we are to survive as a country?
Not really, because this is one point I partly agree with Mwawara when he says that you have started borrowing to build a house, and this house will give you income. Why do you stop? So you won't stop because how will you repay the debt? I've heard some people who are serious economists, I've heard Mudavadi talk about it, I've heard a few politicians talk about it by saying that SGR was a bad thing, we should remove it. How can you remove it from Kenya's balance sheet? It's there. As an economist, the next strategy is how can you reap from it?
Yeah.
It's, after you have something in your balance sheet, for example, you're poison in your stomach, isn't it? How do you remove it? You should get treatment. So for me, the whole idea about the debt ceiling austerity measures, you can't stop it. What is the solution? First, let's start from where we started.
Yeah.
We save 12% to our GDP, which means that how can you finance our GDP? You may actually have to borrow around 88% of the GDP. So first of all, where is the root cause of the issue? Is our savings culture. We are a full-lease economy. We full-lease, and you can blame the government, but I know 88% of Kenyans have four SIM cards each because the other ones are on full-lease. And if Kenyans are themselves borrowing, they are making a government which is borrowing. So let's go back to changing our culture. You can blame government. I know middle class people have like a hashtag saying, I don't know, this hashtag that. Those hashtags are no solutions. We need to know that we have to change our borrowing culture. We need to go to a savings culture. And for example, Singapore saves 50% of their GDP. And that's why the cost of capital in Singapore is very low. Setting up a business is cheaper in Singapore than UK. It's even cheaper than US. So if you look at a business like an economist, There are three costs. One we call cost of goods sold. That is the purchasing, money used to purchase goods you want to sell, isn't it? The second cost is operating cost, transport, salaries, and the rest. The third cost is cost of capital. If cost of capital is high, even you'll see it in bread, you'll see it in fuel, you'll see it in everything. Yeah. So let's work on a culture that will become saving culture, and we move away from the consumerist culture, because Kenyans are consumers and people consume until you can't believe it. Yeah. That's why you see in December, kila mtu anasema pesa yangu imeshikana mahali. My money is held here, my money is held there. We go to a culture of consumption, and let me go to tell you that this is not hard. Yeah. To save money, change your habits, because your expenses are determined by your habits. Trevor can tell you, if you give me your M-Pesa statements, I'll tell you your behavior. If you are a man who likes bringing women every time in the evening, I'll see you paying Uber, isn't it? Because you have to Uber them home, isn't it? Secondly, you'll pay for you'll pay for because they have to come, kila mtu hajakula, sijakula. So when a chick comes at home, she has not eaten, isn't it? I look at your chocolate bills. So if you change your behavior, you'll save money. Yeah. And before we change our culture as a country to move to a savings culture, we'll borrow, our leaders will borrow. Because look here, if we were saving 50% to our GDP, we could be funding our national budget from savings. But now we are funding it from debt. Now, we need to start looking for a way to educate the Kenyan economy, the Kenyans themselves, to start saving. People think saving is hard, but I can tell you it's as easy as changing habits. Okay. So let me bring in Reginald on this. Reginald, is that where the solution is, that we now have to shift into a savings culture?
Trevor, okay, you know me, I like building up with numbers. Yeah. In 2013, when Jubilee government came in, revenue was around 1.1 trillion. Expenditure was 1.4. Yeah. Expenditure was even higher because when Jubilee came in power, I think in September, they had a supplementary budget of around 121 billion. That was their first move in terms of finance. And they had a budget deficit of 334 billion. Yeah. Come 2016, after the first term, revenue had only grown by 18% to 1.3 trillion. But expenditure had grown by 57% to 2.2 trillion. And the budget deficit there was 702 billion. What am I saying? And by 2016, they were paying around 250 to 280 billion in interest payments. If you're a student of economics, you know that the effects of those 5 years is what we are feeling now. Correct. And we will feel it going forward. Yes. Yeah. Number two, if you are persistently running a budget deficit of around 40%, and not budget deficit to GDP, people should get rid of that ratio. That is a very fake ratio. Yeah. When you want to look at your real deficit, you look at revenue versus expenditure. Jubilee were overspending by 40% on average for their first 5 years. Yeah. That means if assuming revenue is 1 trillion and you're spending 40%, that's 400 billion times 5 years. Yeah, that's 2 trillion of overspending. So that's 2 trillion. That means it had to be borrowed, and it has to be borrowed going forward. As of now, the budget deficit 2021 was around 965. This budget that is coming, they say 864, but the true one is around 1 trillion now, which is something that has to be funded. But the difference between 2017 and 2021 is that revenue has now been growing faster at 38%. And expenditure has been growing at a slower rate, because the growth between 2017 and 2021, expenditure has only grown by 22%. Versus 57% in the first term. So there is a certain bit of austerity that is coming in. It's still growing, but the pace of growth has actually drastically reduced vis-a-vis the first 5 years. Yeah. So all these deficits that have been run between 2013 and 2017 is what is leading to more borrowing now, because you have to pay. When you spend what you don't have, you have to borrow, and when you borrow, you have to pay, to the extent that this last year, 2021, our interest payments, debt repayment was around 461 billion. Yeah? Which is close to 40–50% of your revenue. So if you are collecting 1.8 trillion and 40% of it is going to pay debt, that means what you are remaining with to pay expenditure drastically reduces.
Yeah.
And remember, of that 1.8, 40% is going to debt, and there's a 300 and something that is to go to counties. Yeah. So what actually remains in terms of paying national government services and stuff like that, and all these other social benefits that we have to do, actually becomes drastically small. If we are going to sort out our debt problem, yeah, number one, this deficit, revenue to expenditure has to, it's not GDP to whatever, but you can always play around with, Jubilee has been playing around with GDP. Rebased it in 2013, rebased it again. So they have a way of just rebasing GDP to make sure that their ratios look good. Yeah. So if we look at revenue to expenditure, how do we reduce the gap between what we are spending vis-a-vis the revenue we are collecting? Because as long as we persist at an average of 40%, we are always going to be persistently borrowing. We are already in a debt trap, unfortunately, because we have to borrow to repay debt. Yeah. So that has to come down. And how does that come down? Yeah, people I know, some people are campaigning here, reduce taxes, reduce whatever cost of living. I had Senator Mwaura saying the cost of living has gone up. He's compared some numbers for sugar and flour. I start wondering how he's a development economist. Yeah. Fuel prices 2 years, 3 years ago were around $30 a barrel. Right now they're at $96 a barrel. Kenya imports all its fuel. Yeah. If fuel prices go up, yeah, so the cost of sugar, of farming sugar, goes up, not because the government or because of taxes, because VAT has not changed. It's still 16%. Most taxes on these things have not changed.
Yeah.
But one, the cost of transporting the inputs to the farmer has gone up. The cost of transporting the produce from the farmer back to the market has gone up. And the cost of electricity has gone up. And there are many other things that just fuel or energy prices cause in the rise in food prices. So oil prices globally have gone up by close to 220%, 230%. So even the increment we're seeing in prices is actually very small for now, as in we've not even started seeing or feeling the pinch of what is actually going to come. And what could have been done if we had an active parliament that actually looked at the suffering of the Kenyans, as they claim that they actually do right now.
Yeah.
You know, MPs are paid close to 710,000 basic. Remove tax 685, but if you add all those mileages, sitting, responsibility, hardship, allowance, blah, 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 it comes to 1.3 million a month. They're actually a very expensive bunch of people to maintain. When oil was at 30, why did we not see legislation and plans to find out how then do we make sure that we get enough oil, either by building storage, going into forward contracts, when the oil was still $20 a barrel. So that by now, we are getting cheaper oil that will be coming to come in. But right now, Parliament is busy writing legislation, cautioning people on fuel prices. I'm thinking it's reactionary and we are not proactive going about this. Yeah. And finally, Trevor, still just on this, just to pick something that Honorable Mudavadi mentioned, or is it Kimani Chungwa, about 35% to counties? Yeah. That he mentioned. And I think that was done just to show that it can be done outside BBI. But the problem with that reasoning is, if you put it in the appropriation bill that 35% goes to counties, an appropriation bill can be amended in September and in October. Yeah, because it is within the power of the government that is within. Yeah. As Kenya, if we want to start moving forward in a way that our economic policies are not tempered so much by a government that comes into power, you put it into your constitution. So you find in the US, there are certain things that a sitting president cannot change. Certain allocation, percentage allocation that goes to certain areas that cannot be changed. Right now, a president cannot come and say, I will not pay 15% to counties, because they'll be going against the constitution. If it is put in the constitution that it's supposed to be 35%, you find the next government who comes has no authority to change that. But increasing allocation to counties is a short-term solution. Why do I say so? National government subsidy to counties should not be this high The problem that we've done, we have devolved the payroll, but national government holds all the revenue. Ideally, solutions that will be coming around making sure that devolution works is that VAT, fuel tax, excess duty that is raised in a county should stay in that county.
Okay.
This will still be this one person, one vote thing. Because the counties that are growing, and it gives motives, incentives for governors to grow their counties to attract businesses so that they can collect more revenue. Okay. Then the role of central government now becomes say, okay, you have this arid area where there are not so many businesses, let's allocate more money to there. Okay. Use devolution working.
Okay. Honorable Mora, is a debt commission creation a possible solution? Sakwa Bunyasi had a bill that was in Parliament that somehow is just in the melee there. Would that help us fix this debt situation and allow us to reduce deficit and live within our means, having a debt commission? Or is just that another creation for an avenue of money being spent?
Yeah, well, I think it's important to look at the merits of that. But before that, I should tell my friend from London, we went to school in England, and we studied there, so we know what we are talking about. The issue about a debt commission, we made a mistake when we merged the National Treasury and the Ministry of Finance and Planning. You know, this should have been totally different. Like the same way we have the county treasury. And then we have, the National Treasury, the Minister for National Treasury. We should have like the Chancellor of the Exchequer in England, so that you differentiate the two. Now, we have been asking for a national debt register for the longest. And believe you me, there was a time the Minister for Finance tried to make this public, and he faced a very serious backlash. Because some of the things that have been borrowed for is actually a shame because they never achieved what they were intended for. And some of these syndicated loans are basically Kenyans borrowing to government the money they have stolen from government. And that needs to be said very publicly. So when you want to eliminate on who actually is doing it, then of course you'll face a lot of resistance. So a national debt authority will help us because it now removes that agency from the National Treasury. But in terms of the executive order, in terms of the hierarchy of government, it would have been better if that were managed by the National Treasury away from the Minister for Finance, because then if it was anchored in the Constitution, it would be more independent, if you see my point. Because then if you have a National Debt Management Authority under the same Minister for Finance, they are likely to be mismanaged. However, we've also seen the benefit of the Parliamentary Budget Office. You know, I've been, I've served 6 years in the budget system, so I know. They tend to be more objective, even when the technical advice is actually dismissed, Trevor. But at least you have that objectivity where then somebody tells you, okay, you are projecting that we are growing at 6.2%. In actual sense, we are growing at 5%. So that then you do not massage the figures the way I had my friend Opio and I trying to manage so that we don't look like we have a lot of debt. But let me also come to some of the things that have been raised here as a way forward. Is that you cannot blame Kenyans for borrowing Fuliza or Professor Ogola. You cannot, because who are the owners of this Fuliza at 10% per day? It's because we have been crowded out of borrowing in the private sector from the banks, because the banks are lending government up to 900 billion. That is the money you and I save. So we save, actually, but all of that money is being borrowed by government because it has got a better return on investment. And this is after even borrowing internationally at the very high interest rates, repayment of 5 to 6 years at between 11 to 35% payment. And that is very, very serious. You heard Aden Duale saying it, and that is true, because people are getting kickbacks for these syndicated loans. So you cannot blame Kenyans for that. The solution would be government to borrow less. In fact, one of the proposals I was making in the Senate is that you cap government domestic borrowing, so that you allow people with the novel ideas to get money to implement them and create employment. That's number one. Number two is basically, right now, we have moved from a recurrent surplus to actually a development deficit. We basically don't have money for roads, dams and whatever we have been using to steal from government. So what then do you do in that regard? Because obviously right now as we speak, Trevor, 800 billion is being borrowed to even pay my salary for February. And it's good to be sincere. So what do? We need then to look at it. Even when we have development budget that we still can borrow, can we allocate a third of that development budget to increase productivity? Because there are three factors that are going to help us: productivity, competitiveness, and markets. On the issue of productivity, is going back to the basics. Yeah. Right now, the biggest foreign exchange earner for Kenya is actually remittances. People are running away from the country, and it's good, but then can we go back to our tea and coffee, but also change the model? For example, right now, tea and coffee in central Kenya is not very viable. Why don't we do it in Trans Nzoia, where there is more land, for example? Move away from maize in Uasin Gishu and do avocado. A liter of avocado oil is retailing at 6,000. That is good rather than giving the 6,000 handout. So that then you have people producing avocado. The same avocado being sold in Nyeri at 20 bob is being sold at a shop in downtown Manhattan at $3. That's basically nearly 400 Kenya shillings. So you then start looking at how do you open up markets within East Africa. Now we have a whole, Congo with about 120 million people. They have not done census of late, but at least the whole of East Africa, we have a potential 170 million, market to sell our commodities. Do away with issues to do with sugar, for example, in Western Kenya, where you are using 250,000, to produce $800 to produce 1 ton, and yet in Brazil they are doing at 250. So it is not viable; it cannot compete commercially. So you have to look at all of this in terms of value chains. Yeah. We are importing about 25 million shoes, but yet we are exporting raw hides and skins. I mean, how can we then have a leather industry locally here? Yeah. How do we make sure, for example, our milk, you actually have coolers, so that because the quality of that milk changes the moment you do not have proper, storage. Yeah. Give milk farmers coolers, so that then you liberalize the market. You move from this oligopolistic dominance. You see, so some of these things are the ones that are going to recalibrate the economy, so that you have a wider revenue base. Therefore, then come to the issue of go back to we are now classified as a low middle LMC, yeah, low middle income economy. Yet actually in all purposes we are actually an LDC. Why? Because if you look our GDP per capita is about 1,200 against a country like Zambia 1,700. But you see, if you go to Zambia, you are going to see more poor people than Kenya. But because it's a smaller country and you calculate the issue of GDP, I may agree with my friend from London on that one. Then we look like they have more money than us. Yet in actual sense we may do. But the truth of the matter, we still an LDC country. Okay. This issue of rebasing the economy just because of new census is a fraud, because the new areas of growth are in terms of communication. How much money is going to people's pocket through communication, for example? Okay. You talk about that same Fuliza, you talk about M-Pesa, but then you have a multinational, you have a telco called Safaricom, which is making supernormal profits. It's not really trickling down to the Kenyan, economy, and you see, it's actually, largely foreign owned. Okay. So you have to really look and restructure the economy. Yeah. And also, Trevor, you've got to bite the bullet. Yeah. Here we have 247 agencies of government. You have the ministries, at least the constitution capped them to 22. You have a whole 47 county governments. This may not be done now because you cannot remove meat from people's mouths, but we over-devolved. 47 unviable counties, I think that was a mistake, and for me, I stand by that. But then what you can do, therefore, is to reduce the number of these state agencies. Yeah. Okay, because they are all gobbling from the center. And also, just the workforce of government is eating up to 800 billion Kenya shillings or thereabout. Okay. The last time I checked was 687, but it has since increased. So how do you make sure you restructure, government? We need a smaller government, not a bigger one. Okay. So that then they reduce the recurrent expenditure, which is now at 88%, and development is only at 12%. So that you have the way, and Opio and I is here, you can confirm, we usually have the 70-30, matrix. 70 recurrent, 30 for development. We are 88 versus 12, you see? Okay. So all of this needs to be reworked, and it is not an easy job. It actually means you have to take the bull by its horn. Yeah. I asked President Uhuru that question in person in 2013, because that was the plan. You merge some of the ministries. Why do you have Uwezo Fund? You have Women Fund. You have Youth Fund. You have Disability Fund. All of those ones, you can actually create something that everybody who is vulnerable gets from one, so that you reduce the cost of administration. Okay. So those are some of the things that will, in the long run and medium term, help us. And also, in terms of budgeting, we used to have what we call medium-term expenditure plan. So we are planning a 3-year cycle. Now we are planning year by year through the BPS. It has failed.
All right.
Go back to the medium-term expenditure framework for 5 years, medium-term, the MTEF, so that people know their budget forecasting for 3 years, not every other year, and therefore then we don't have money, yet we have already committed the budgets of projects that we cannot pay.
Okay. Let me see some of the feedback that's coming through here. We're talking about solutions now. Then after that, we'll take a quick break. Ibra? Yeah, let's see what you're saying. All right, let's see what you're saying here on feedback. Lalama Stefa says, what is wrong with Kenya having GDP to debt ratio of 70%, yet developed countries like Japan are way above us at 260%? Using this debt is not bad. Our GDP has grown by 100% from 2012 to date. Okay, questionable numbers. Remy Butia says, Parliament is to blame for the mess we are witnessing. Kenya's debt service rate is high. Therefore, there is need for the government to consider exploring innovative ways to service public debt or finance the fiscal deficit. Okay? Sam Masika says, the price of basic commodities can purely be blamed on the time we wasted shouting about BBI. Okay? Vitalis Frodwa says, our economy is failing because our leadership is a liability to the nation. Parliament is full of selfish people. Okay? Julius Cherui says, it is true that the brilliant brains like Mwaura and Ishungwa had a plan for the finance of this nation. When they were kicked out of committees, the government went loose on the looting spree. Okay. Charlowood Rosie says, public debt is a serious issue that shouldn't be politicized because it affects everyone economically. It should be dealt with through debates on the floor of both houses. Engineer Lazaro says, skyrocketing price of essential commodities and running foreign debts can't be solved through blame game in political rallies. I think people are just looking for cheap publicity. Mogire Jasper says, one of the problems we have is that money didn't follow functions to the counties. The national government remained with the money without functions, e.g. health, agriculture. We need to align government as per the 2010 law. Parallel bureaucracy. Okay. All right. Let's continue this conversation on appeal. Let's talk about the Mama Mboga and simplify this conversation. How do we fix it going forward? Because they're the ones bearing the hugest brunt. In fact, Speaker of the National Assembly says that as he's blaming cartels for the skyrocketing